Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Our program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Our program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Our program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senior Policy Advisor to the Secretary of State and Director of the Secretary's Policy Planning Staff, Brian Hook.
Good afternoon. An important part of this ministerial is providing all of us the opportunity to hear directly from victims of religious persecution. And we are here this week to press for greater religious freedom around the world so that we have fewer victims. In this work, we will not settle for religious believers merely to be tolerated. The free exercise of religion means more than being suffered by one's government. By religious freedom, we do not mean the restriction of religion to houses of worship. There is a greater role for faith in the public square, and it is vital to the peace of a nation. As we have seen throughout history, those countries that respect religious freedom flourish, while those that do not decline and frequently fail. One regime that has not respected religious freedom is Iran. The Iranian regime has institutionalized a campaign of harassment and incarceration against religious minorities, including Baha'is, Christians, and Sunni Muslims, among others. Security forces regularly raid Sunni prayer sites, many of which are forced to operate underground. The regime frequently denies building permits to members of religious minorities. The regime has gone so far as to prohibit Baha'is from government employment and even raid their homes and confiscate their private property without cause or due process. In Iran, those who dare to exercise their fundamental right to religious freedom suffer terribly. The two women we will hear from shortly were jailed in the infamous Evin prison for practicing their Christian faith. For almost 40 years, the Ayatollahs have used this prison to jail, torture, and murder. Thousands have been taken to Evin prison to suffer. And as we meet today, some are jailed there for their religious beliefs. Some are my fellow countrymen, and some are your fellow countrymen. Miriam and Marzia were arrested in 2009, and they were jailed for nearly a year in Evin prison. And I'm very proud to welcome them here today. It is also my honor to welcome Monier Kanjani, the niece of Jamaluddin Kanjani, one of several Baha'i leaders in Iran, who has also been repeatedly imprisoned by the regime for practicing his faith. Monier's uncle, like many members of Iran's Baha'i community, have been persecuted since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Monier lives in Maryland and is an advocate for Iran's Baha'i community and for her uncle. And so please join me in welcoming Miriam, Marzia, and Monier.
Good afternoon. I would like to start by sharing that the Baha'is from any race, tribe, or ethnicity, wherever they live, they love Iran because the Baha'i faith originated in Iran. In particular, Iranian Baha'is like me are required, as a matter of our faith, to respect our government under which we live, including the current one, which rules the country birth of Baha'u'llah in Iran. At the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, I lived in Iran as a child with my family. Some Baha'is believed with the coming of the Islamic Revolution, the injustices and persecutions of the Baha'is, which had been going on for 130 years, would stop. Because Ayatollah Khomeini, during his interviews in Paris, would make comments such as, "Our revolution is a spiritual one. Freedom and justice is one of our main goals." Others were skeptical, but many were hopeful. Unfortunately, the skeptics were correct. From the early months of the revolution, the pressures and persecutions of the past increased noticeably. Dismissing of Baha'i students from universities, firing Baha'is from different establishments, arrest of Baha'is, and execution of many. This and many other issues created anxiety and pressure within the Baha'i community. Despite the different social injustices, Baha'is were still able to hold their religious ceremonies of worship and service for a few years after the revolution. However, the officials did not respond to the Baha'is' complaints of persecution. There was no protection anymore. Baha'is felt anxious and unsafe, and some families left Iran, including my own parents. We hoped that this would be temporary and that soon we could return to our homeland. While residing in America, we would hear regularly of arrests, executions, and looting of Baha'i homes and businesses. Since I was a child, I studied the history and learned of the injustices against the Baha'is. From the inception of the faith, persecutions were many and intense, but durations was short. Such intense persecutions would take place in a city or a village, but was short-lived. Prior to the Islamic Revolution, the persecutions were instigated by the Muslim clergy and carried out through ordinary people. However, after a short period, the government would step in and things would calm down. But in the last 40 years, the world has witnessed the continuous ruthless persecutions of the Baha'is in Iran. The intense pressure and cruelty against this religion has increased and continues to remain consistent. The persecutions have been systematic throughout Iran, and no one is spared. Throughout the years, The world has received information on how the minority groups' rights have not been upheld. Though there are many deficiencies with the basic laws to uphold the human rights in Iran, if even they would honor the existing laws for the minorities, the Baha'is would feel less pressure and the quality of their lives would improve. According to some of my knowledgeable Persian friends, these basic rights in Chapter 3 of Iranian government laws are law number 19, 20, 23, 22, 28, and 30. My information is very limited, and I would not be able to justifiably share the extent of injustice and persecutions that has occurred. However, I can share with you some of the experiences of my own family. Mr. Yusuf Subhani, my father's cousin, got arrested and executed the second year of the Islamic Revolution. All his property and belongings got confiscated. Gulshan Subhani, Mr. Yusuf's son, also my cousin's husband, was arrested and incarcerated for 5 years. From the beginning of the revolution, my uncle Jamaluddin Kanjani was targeted. His brick factory and other property was confiscated, and due to false charges, has been incarcerated several times. The last incarceration was for 10 years when he was at the age of 75. He just got released on March 2018 at age 85. However, while in prison, this past 10 years, he lost his dear sister, Shams, and his beloved wife, Ashraf. My cousin Alauddin Kanjani, son of Jamal, has been in prison twice, his property confiscated, and his optical store closed. He has been in limbo financially ever since. Fuad Kanjani, Alauddin's son, was refused attendance to university and incarcerated for 4 years. Fuad's sister, Leva, was also refused attendance to university and incarcerated for 2 years. My cousin Behfar Kanjani, who lives in Semnan, was arrested, imprisoned for 4 years, and his small clothing store confiscated, yet again financially in limbo for him and his family. Shahram Jedi, my cousin's husband, has been incarcerated and harassed multiple times. Another cousin, Afrasiab Kanjani, who produced optical lenses in Semnan, his business was shut down. Mr. Nejad Behinain, my aunt's husband, was incarcerated for 2 years in Esfahan. Navid Kanjani, my cousin's son, served 6 years in prison. My family's farm that has been in our possession for 100 years and has been passed down from generations, which is known for its beauty and rich productive soil, bearing amazing fruit and crops in Semnan, was deliberately demolished and the family farmhouse and its land destroyed. This is an example of that has happened just to my family. Thousands throughout the country of Iran continue to face persecutions for simply their religious belief. Thank you for allowing me to share my story.
Good afternoon. My name is Marzia Amirizadeh, and I am here with my friend Miriam Rostampur. We are both from Iran. We would like to thank Ambassador Brownbaugh, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and the US administration for bringing together people from different nations, government officials, and the victims of religious persecution in order to advance religious freedom. In 2009, we were arrested by the Islamic Republic's authorities because of our Christian faith. We spent 259 days in Evin, one of the most notorious prisons in Iran. We were subjected to interrogations, went through daily mental tortures and stress, and we were threatened and indicted with execution by hanging for charges of apostasy, blasphemy, and promoting Christianity in Iran. The government authorities constantly threatened our lives and the lives of our family members during our interrogations and in the court sessions in order to put pressure on us to deny our faith in Jesus Christ. Since Islam is the only official religion in Iran, government authorities forbid other religious minorities from practicing their faith. The persecution of Christian minorities has increased in the past few years as well. Individuals who have converted from Islam to Christianity are considered infidel and dirty. They are subjected to extreme form of persecution. Muslims who leave Islam often face death penalty and physical and mental torture. The government usually forced them to leave the country. In Evin prison, we were called dirty and infidels for months. We were threatened to physical torture, and also the guards would encourage radical Muslims inside Evin prison to insult us. We couldn't use other prison facilities such as library that other prisoners were allowed to use. In Evin prison, doctors refused to visit us or give us medication when we were sick because we were Christians. We were forced to participate in Islamic prayers and didn't have access to Bible. We have witnessed the guards physically abusing and beating prisoners and taking them for execution by hanging, which was a big mental torture for us. We also experienced being in 209 solitary cells and had long hours of interrogations. In those cells, we could hear the cries of other prisoners whom were being beaten and tortured by the guards. Once a week, they would take us to a bigger room for interrogation by 2 interrogators. For months, we had no contacts with our families, and we couldn't have a lawyer. Even inside Evin prison, we were discriminated and treated differently by the guards only because we were Christians. During all our trials, our judges threatened us to execution by hanging. They told us we could be free only if we deny our faith in Jesus Christ. The only thing that helped us to stand on our faith was our personal relationships with Jesus and the love of God that we have experienced in our lives. We told them many times that Jesus is our Lord and you cannot take him away from us.
We believe we are free and alive today because of Jesus' power and his miracles. After the involvement of many international organizations, government officials, and various Christian ministries, the Iranian government had to release us. But just before we got released from Evin prison, we were threatened by the intelligence officers that they were going to watch us daily. And we were not allowed to have any Christian activities. They directly threatened us and mentioned that they couldn't guarantee our safety and security outside Evin prison if we decide to continue living in Iran. They gave us some examples of the pastors who in the past were secretly killed after they got released from prison. Some of their threats were that you might die in an accident or your house may catch on fire. Eventually, we were forced to live in Iran in 2010. As my friend mentioned, in Evin prison, we have witnessed many injustices, such as persecution and imprisonment of other religious minorities, tortures and executions of innocent young men and women, imprisonment of political prisoners, including university students, journalists, and lawyers, and so many other human rights violations. We shared some of them in our book, Captive in Iran. In recent years, the human rights situation in Iran has worsened. Hundreds of Christians have been arrested by the Iranian authorities and charged with disrupting national security for being a Christian and participating in home churches, and would receive prison sentence of between 2 to 10 years. Despite these pressures, Christianity is spreading in Iran. However, it is not only the religious minorities who suffer under the Islamic Republic regime. All the Iranians are experiencing different forms of persecution and suffering. Majority of the people are tired of this corrupted regime, and they are fighting for freedom, democracy, and regime change in Iran. There have been numerous demonstrations in the past few months. Thousands of people got arrested, tortured, and murdered by the Iranian authorities because they are protesting against the economic corruption and the human rights violations committed by the regime. Our hope and prayer for our country, Iran, is that one day Iran will be a free country. Iran will be a free country ruled by a democratic government, and people of Iran who are taken hostage by this oppressive regime for 40 years and are isolated from the international community will be free. We hope for a day that all religious minorities can live together in peace, without having the fear of getting harassed, arrested, tortured, or killed by the government. Today, more than any time, people of Iran who are fighting for their freedom from the oppressive and corrupted regime of Iran need the international community to stand with them. We would like to urge you to listen to the desire of the Iranian people, support their voices, and speak up against the injustice, corruption, and the human rights violations of the Iranian regime. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
I think the testimonies of these three brave women of faith help to underline the importance of our work. The importance of civil society and its leadership is critical so that we don't have victim stories like these. And I want to thank them for their courage and for sharing their story and for being with us today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Ambassador Sam Brownback.
Great, powerful testimonies again coming forward from individuals. I do want to recognize before he leaves the stage Brian Hook. Brian heads strategy and policy, and he's been one of the key people behind pulling this whole thing together for some period of time. When I show up here and he had this discussion, and he really wanted to see this take place, and he wanted to see it take place now, and he fought for it. It's the Secretary's conference. Mike Pompeo wanted this to be the first ministerial he had ever called. Brian Hook set it all up to get it going. Brian, I want to really recognize you for doing that. Nice job. He and Knox Thames, and Knox is, I hope, Knox, are you here? There you are. Knox, stand up as well. This was Knox's idea that Brian did, so. So guys like me get to stand up in front of you, and they say, oh, great job, nice job, way to go, you did it all. Well, it was already stewing, and it was his idea, and it was Brian's lift, and it was the Secretary's call. He's the one that did it, so that really pulled it together, and I just hats off to all of them. And we've got a number of people that I'm going to recognize a little bit later on too in the agency, and particularly in the International Religious Freedom section that have done so much to pull this all together. I want to recognize them, but particularly catch those. Thank you, the ladies that testified here from Iran and what's taking place there. It's deeply concerning what's taking place there for some period of time, and I'm appreciative of them speaking out. We're now privileged to have among us another champion of pluralism, of tolerance, and religious freedom, USAID Administrator Mark Green, who has fought for liberty and worked for economic prosperity across the globe and across his career. And whether it was his role as president of the nonpartisan International Republican Institute or CEO of the Initiative for Global Development, or as a former U.S. ambassador to Tanzania, or as congressman, Mark Green has always championed the values of justice, human freedom, and sustainable development. As the director of at the direction of the Vice President, Administrator Green and I recently were on a delegation to northern Iraq to look at our aid programs into that region and how they could be more effective to help the displaced communities, particularly minority communities. We met with Yazidis and Christians and many other groups to see what can be done better, and he's refashioning programs now in that area. I saw, in traveling with him, a passion and a determination and a stamina. He went from there to Colombia. He's been 2 other places since then and back here now. He's constantly on the road and constantly directing a very important agency that I think many of you work with that we also hope can be a great partner on religious freedom and putting forward programs and supporting programs that do religious freedom around the world. Please join me in welcoming the Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Mark Green.
Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be with all of you, and it's an even greater honor to be able to offer some thoughts on the importance of freedom of worship in today's world. You know, I was thinking about it the other day. There was that great story I heard about a sign in a government building here in Washington. It read, "In case of nuclear attack, federal restrictions concerning prayer in this building shall be temporarily suspended." I want to thank Secretary Pompeo and Ambassador Brownback for ensuring that we're not waiting for just such a moment in order to talk about this important topic. I will say that some observers may wonder why it is that the U.S. is hosting this ministerial, why religious freedom is deserving of our time and attention. Well, from my point of view, personally and as the leader of USAID, there are many reasons. First and foremost, for us here in America, the freedom to worship our Creator according to the tenets of our individual faith traditions, well, it's an essential part of our national self-identity. The free exercise of religion, after all, is what brought those pilgrims to our shores, having fled oppression in Europe. Once they arrived, they soon realized that freedom for faith hardly guaranteed an easy life. They faced hardships, they faced perils, but they persevered and they survived. And despite their losses and setbacks, their continuation in a new free land meant so much to them that they bequeathed to us a great holiday, the holiday of Thanksgiving. Many years later, one of our greatest presidents, and in many ways modern times quintessential American, Ronald Reagan, often spoke of his belief that America should aspire to be a shining city on a hill, an example of liberty for the rest of the world. Of course, he was borrowing from one of those same pilgrims, John Winthrop, who in turn was borrowing from the New Testament's gospel according to Matthew. Winthrop made that idea, that image of a city upon a hill, a central theme in his very first sermon after the pilgrims arrived in Massachusetts. Again, all in the name of liberty and the freedom to worship as we each see fit. 150 years after Winthrop, that same devotion to religious liberty was seen as so central to the character of a young America that our founders enshrined it as the first item in the Bill of Rights to our Constitution. It was quite literally the first line. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It has often been called America's first liberty, and it is not merely because of its placement, but because it is the prerequisite for all of our other liberties, for all of those other freedoms that we hold so dear. This declaration of the need for limitations on government's power over the individual and his or her right to worship was the first of its kind and really is one of America's greatest gifts to human civilization. Now, a second reason that I think this ministerial is so important is that the discussion that we're taking up of religious liberty goes so far beyond America's shores, as you all know. Simply put, today, billions of souls around the world feel strongly that their spiritual beliefs give purpose and meaning to their lives. Recognizing that reality across faith traditions, that can bring mankind closer, and protecting each other's right to worship really is protecting each other's humanity. At USAID, we see freedom of worship as an essential element in our pursuit of government that is citizen-centered and citizen-responsive. It is inseparable from freedoms of expression, assembly, association, and freedom from discrimination. Yet a third reason why USAID believes this topic is so timely and important is a much more practical one. In order for us as an agency to be able to accomplish our core purposes, our core mission, whether it be in development assistance or in humanitarian relief, we need to reach corners and communities where governments cannot effectively go. or where they have chosen not to go. We must be able to touch people who have been left behind, people who have been forgotten. In many settings, being able to partner with the community of faith, with faith-based organizations, enables us to do just that. Faith-based partners are often uniquely trusted in those forgotten communities. They can harness networks and resources and insights that help us reach out in ways that we otherwise could not. Religious liberty matters because it enables faith-based groups to work with USAID and others without surrendering their essential faith character. A fourth reason, and perhaps the most pointed reason today, this ministerial matters is because intolerance has all too often driven violence and oppression. And that we have to remember as we gather here in this beautiful city. Leaders throughout history, from Cyrus the Great to Thomas Jefferson, they have warned us over and over again that the need for vigilance and pushing back on religious intolerance is itself essential to the survival of liberty. In an area of weaponization of information technology and social media, the perils of such intolerance have never been greater, have never been more important. It's this last reason that I've seen, quite frankly, most vividly on display in some of the recent travels to which Ambassador Brownback pointed. As he mentioned last month, he and I and others at Vice President Pence's direction went on a delegation trip to northern Iraq. Our mission was to better understand the sufferings that so many have faced as a result of extreme intolerance. We visited some of the victims of ISIS, Christians, Yazidis, and other minority groups. The stories that we heard were heart-rending. When the Islamic State captured the Iraqi town of Tel Skuf 4 years ago, terrorists desecrated the local Chaldean Catholic Church and beheaded congregants right on the altar. And that slaughter was only one episode from the genocide that ISIS waged against Christians and other vulnerable religious groups across its so-called caliphate. Their terrible, inhuman attacks nearly exterminated some of the region's most ancient faith communities. Nearly 90% of Christians have fled Iraq in the past 15 years, emptying entire villages that had stood for more than 1,000 years. The Yazidi population, adherents of another ancient faith, were similarly reduced and attacked. Our delegation visited a heavily damaged church in Karamlas, where we saw desecrated graves of religious leaders. The bell tower. The church itself was heavily damaged, but the bell tower, somehow the bell remained intact, all during the evil occupation by ISIS. It actually rang while we were there, as if to say that religious liberty is not so easily destroyed. We also visited Yazidi survivors, and I will never forget looking in the eyes of a mother in that IDP camp. She couldn't tell us the fate of some of the members of her immediate family, and then she showed us photos as though somehow, some way, we could help her find them. That's what unchecked religious intolerance looks like. It has been said that the truest measure of our commitment to religious liberty is the priority we place on protecting it for those of other faiths. By affirming the principle that an attack on one faith is ultimately an attack on all faiths. And that's one of the reasons that so many of us here have been so shaken by the plight of Burma's Rohingya community. A few months back, I traveled to Burma and Bangladesh to visit with at least some of the 700,000 Muslim Rohingya who have desperately fled their homes in the Rakhine states for the relative safety of Cox's Bazar. As our State Department and other sources have judged, the Rohingya were victimized by nothing less than ethnic cleansing, extrajudicial killings, rapes, tortures, beatings, arbitrary arrests, displacement, destruction of property, all driven by intolerance and sectarian hatred. I visited an IDP camp near Sitwe in Burma, and I met with people who had been held there for as long as 6 years. They couldn't return to their homes or travel elsewhere without specific written government approval. They survived off food rations given by donors, and they had no access to speak of to health care. The single most disturbing moment of my tenure as USAID administrator was looking into the eyes of a young Muslim father in that camp as he said in heartbreaking pain that his son had only known life in that guarded settlement. He had no access to education, and the only food he had was given to him by strangers. He had no prospects for the future. I have never seen such deep despair in anyone's eyes. Never. All because of his faith and ethnicity. Attacks on religious liberty don't always take an interfaith form. Sometimes they're simply actions by an authoritarian regime to try to bend the community of faith to their will, to try to force the community to surrender its character and principles for political ends that the tyrant seeks. Just last week, I heard firsthand from local Nicaraguan community leaders as I passed through Miami. I heard of the brutality and ongoing violence occurring in Nicaragua right now as we speak. Over 350 people have been killed, with the death toll rising every day. The church and the clergy, who believe their faith calls them to try to bring peace and to try to mediate, are now under attack for those very same activities. Because priests were unwilling to simply stand by during the atrocities of that regime, Daniel Ortega has called the Roman Catholic Church itself coup-mongers. Nicaraguans in Miami also told me how Ortega's paramilitary forces have stormed the parish of Reverend Gutierrez. Amid the hail of bullets, Father Gutierrez called a local radio station. And before breaking down in tears, he said, "They are defiling the churches. The government is killing us." In a recent tweet by Nicaraguan Bishop Baez, he stated, quoting, "The government of Nicaragua crosses the limit of which is inhuman and immoral. Criminal repression against civilians, mostly students, is condemnable from every point of view. The international community cannot be indifferent." And he's right. We cannot be indifferent, and we must not be indifferent, particularly because we are believers in religious liberty. And so today's question, and the real question for this ministerial, is how do we offer hope? How do we offer help? First, of course, is this ministerial itself, the first of its kind, that so many of you are here from so far in so many faith traditions. That's a powerful signal to the world. Religious freedom matters. Religious freedom is important. Religious freedom is a universal aspiration, and its supporters are awakening. The statements that this ministerial produces and the declarations we issue, the messages that we each bring back home, they do offer hope to those communities who are suffering as we speak. Of course, hope is insufficient if it is left unaccompanied by action. At USAID, because we really look at freedom of worship as a core human right, we're supporting programs to address religious hate speech and interfaith conflict, to promote the strengthening and enforcement of laws that protect religious freedom, and to increase the capacity of civil society to advocate for it. That support is reflected in technical assistance and, yes, financial support for civil society. Third, we are undertaking reforms to our partnership and procurement process to make it easier for organizations, including smaller NGOs and civil society groups, many of you, to partner with us in our work. We will consult with you earlier, consider your ideas more effectively, reduce the paperwork delays. We will find ways to harness your strength and capacities. In short, not only is the door open, the welcome sign is turned on. Fourth, we need to do everything that we can to prevent the worst manifestations of religious intolerance before they rear their ugly heads, before they harm and destroy. It is too late once the damage is done. So we're also working to assemble metrics to measure capacity and commitment in the countries where we work. And some of these metrics look specifically at things like liberal democracy, the capacity of civil society, and the inclusiveness of government policies. And we think that they can serve as subtle signs and warnings when intolerance is on the rise. Authoritarian intrusions, well, we know they aren't always predictable or even preventable, but there is no excuse for us not to be vigilant. And finally, at USAID, in partnership with others, we aim to reinforce and strengthen ethnic and religious pluralism where it has historically existed. It isn't about the content of faith. It never has been. It's about society's tolerance for multiple faith traditions. We believe that religious pluralism, which is part of a cultural mosaic, we believe it is worth preserving as a matter of development as well as an expression of our values. And one of the clearest cases for this work is in northern Iraq. So most Iraqis refer to minority groups as component groups. And I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't understand the significance. And someone came to me and said, well, that has a very special and powerful meaning in Arabic. It implies that Iraqi society is incomplete without the Christian and Yazidi components of that national mosaic. So Iraqi leaders recognize this. We should help them realize their vision for their country. After all, it was there before the evil of the ISIS reign. To this end, USAID has been working to move quickly in northern Iraq, addressing the challenges facing Christians, Yazidis, and other minorities, providing relief and support so they can return home and rebuild their lives and their communities. Since October of 2017, the U.S. government has redirected nearly $118 million in humanitarian and stabilization assistance to provide infrastructure, support, and life-saving aid, rebuilding things like schools and hospitals, power stations and wells, not to mention livelihoods. These funds cannot rebuild faith, of course, nor can they directly rebuild mosques or shrines or churches. But if we do it right, you and I working together, just maybe they can restore some hope. More is on the way, not just for northern Iraq, but elsewhere. We will respond to religious liberty under attack. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention right here that this is the area where those partnerships with faith-based organizations are irreplaceable. It is the only way this work will get done. It is the only way we'll be effective. As I draw to a close and as we wind down today, let me again thank Secretary Pompeo and Ambassador Brownback for hosting this truly historic ministerial. And let me thank Vice President Pence for being such a staunch advocate for this cause and for the work that we are trying to do. Ronald Reagan once said, "Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant." Today we reaffirm that vision. Today we reaffirm our role in protecting it. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank you for everything that you've done. More importantly, I want to thank you for everything that you're going to do. This is simply another step in a journey we must all undertake. Failing to do so, as Thomas Jefferson warned us, as Cyrus the Great warned us, puts liberty at peril. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work AID is doing and going to continue to do as well. There are a couple people I want to recognize as we close this portion of the ministerial down. While most of you get to go home, we're gearing up. The foreign ministers are showing up. We'll have over 80 countries here. They'll start with a reception this evening and all day tomorrow. So you're kind of the warm-up for Elvis that's showing up here shortly. But a couple people I want to recognize are particularly our staff that's been working this area hard. The International Religious Freedom Office that I have is a small office, but has done a great job here. Cash Gahi is the lead guy that's done most of the work. Thank you. And he's had a really good sidekick in Mariah Mercer. Mariah, are you there? Mariah's working, and then our entire office, our entire IRF office. If you're over there, please stand up, guys. Thank you for putting these things on here. I want to particularly recognize them because they do a great job just day in and day out, but this is on top of all of that. And when you're doing this on the first time, like I said to many people, this is our first wedding. We don't know kind of who to invite, what to expect, what it's going to look like. And with all these faith traditions here, we're not even sure what the wedding's supposed to look like because there can be a lot of different types in different places. But it all hopefully gets us to the same point, which is an alliance. I started with that. I'm ending with that with you. We need an alliance. I've been in the public sector long enough to know that we don't get things done unless we're working with and through you as well. It just doesn't work. And government has its role, and it's important, and it's critical. But you have yours. And if you don't do yours, ours doesn't get very effectively done, if at all. And sometimes we can identify things that we can't act in. Or many times we don't see things until after it may be too late, and it's already, the horse is out of the barn, where we don't have much opportunity to act. But you're there. You're on the front line. So we need you reporting at the outset. You need us suggesting in the middle and early through the whole process. And then at the end, we need to attack this all together. The religious freedom the world has is small in that most people, as I said at the outset, most people in the world live in a religiously restrictive environment. Most people. Pew Center says it's over 75%. So we're 3/4 of the people in the world live in a very restrictive environment. And that's not even with all the mob violence and societal pressures that many places experience. If we're going to change that, you've got to be in the game, and you've got to be in the game with us. And we've got to be in the game there too. We're going to do our part. This administration is fully committed to this cause and is going to keep driving this aggressively. This will be one of the lead foreign policy issues of this administration as we continue to drive this and continue to push it forward and continue to work with it in other countries and regions around the world. We need you there as well. We need you in those places. When we ask and we're hosting meetings or concerns in various places around the world, we hope if that's your area, you show up and help and push and identify and point out to us things that need to be done there. Because we've got to have that partnership for this to effectively work. Because once we pull back, your folks are going to stay there. They're going to be there. And we need that continued effort and that continuation if we're actually to see religious freedom to flourish around the world. So this is the launch of an alliance that we really need. And we get this right, or get it better at least, a lot of people around the world are going to have much more freedom. They're going to have much more security. They're going to sleep much better at night because they're going to not be worried about their families as much. So we need you. Don't get down. Get busy. Don't get worried about how much there is to do. Do whatever you can. They once asked Mother Teresa, she went into a refugee camp, and the reporter asked her, said, there's 10,000 people around here. You can't take care of 10,000 people. She goes, I know. I can take care of one. And then I can take care of another one. And then I can get another one. That's the way we do this. That's the way it's done. You know that. This is the way you do your work. Well, this is the way we're going to get this done. This doesn't conclude, from the sense that this concludes our part of it, but there's going to be a reception afterwards here, just across the street at 23rd Street, at the U.S. Commission of International Religious Freedom is hosting a reception for everybody at the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is just across the street. If you need any directions, you can ask somebody on the way out. You're all welcome to go to that to continue the discussion. I hope you had a great time here, you get a good, safe trip home, and then you start planning immediately what you're going to do and who you're going to do it with. None of us are in this alone. All of us together can change the world. God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, our session today has concluded. Please collect your personal belongings and exit the room. Thank you.